I'm Jonas Callahan, 38, a high school teacher in Vermont, and apparently the only person in my family Grandpa ever trusted. When I leave this world, it goes to Jonas, the lawyer read. And just like that, the room froze, except for the sound of my father's pen snapping in half. They said I didn't deserve it, that the house, the money, even his journals should have gone to real family. But they didn't see the envelope hidden under Harold's desk, or what was inside. If this story sounds familiar, tell me where you're listening from. I have a feeling you've been here too. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that made the hallway clocks sound louder than they had any right to. I was grading midterms in room 204, red pen in hand, window cracked just enough to let in the muddy smell of early spring. The seniors had butchered most of their essays on the old man and the sea, but I didn't take it personally. Hemingway wasn't for everyone, and neither was self-discipline. I was halfway through a paragraph about fishing as a metaphor for capitalism. God help me, when my laptop dinged. One of those polite pings you only get from old-school email clients. The sender? Arnold Levinson. Esquire subject line. Callahan Estate Proceedings. It was the kind of subject line that made the air go still, even with the windows open. For a moment, I stared at it, my finger hovering over the trackpad like it had forgotten how to click. I already knew what it meant. Grandpa was gone. He'd passed 3 weeks earlier, but Arnold hadn't emailed me until now. That was Harold Callahan for you. Never liked to rush closure. Everything had to be deliberate, thought out. Even death, it seemed, came with a grace period. I leaned back in the squeaky desk chair, eyes fixed on the white paint peeling from the radiator. There was something about that name in the sender line, Levinson, that made everything feel more final than the funeral had. Maybe because the funeral had felt more like a business luncheon. My parents had handled it, of course. They'd picked out a sleek casket, arranged flowers in tight, symmetrical bunches, and invited exactly the right number of mourners. Grief. Curated. I hadn't spoken much. I'd stood beside Abby near the back, watching the whole thing unfold like it was someone else's story. That's how it had felt for a while now, like I'd been written out of the family narrative. Grandpa used to tell me, one day, this name will get you into trouble. Or save you. Maybe both. Back then, I didn't know what he meant. I was 11 when he first said it, barefoot on the back porch while he smoked a cigar, and I pretended not to hate the smell. He was teaching me how to shuffle cards, not for poker. He didn't gamble. But because a man should know how to handle uncertainty with steady hands. That was Harold. Steady. Calculated. The kind of man who wore wool suits in July and called everyone sir, even the gas station clerk. My father called him rigid. I called him reliable. I hadn't seen him in the last 2 weeks before he passed. Not because I didn't want to, because I wasn't invited. Mom had said, "Let's keep it simple, Jonas. You know how he gets when things get messy." They'd taken over his care near the end, moved him to some private wing of a retirement facility just outside Montpellier. No visitors unless pre-approved. No drama, they said. Just peace. But the last time I had seen him, really seen him, was 5 weeks before that. He'd asked me to bring him a book. Not just any book, but a particular leather-bound copy of the complete letters of Mark Twain. He was sitting up in that brittle hospital chair like it owed him money, IV hooked to his wrist, but his mind sharper than mine. "I need you to read page 214 aloud," he said. "The part about legacy." I did. And when I finished, he closed his eyes, leaned back and whispered, "That'll do." Then he handed me the book. "Take it. You'll need it more than me soon." I hadn't called my mother since the funeral. I considered it now, staring at Arnold's email, just to ask what I should expect. but my thumb hovered over her name on my phone for a full minute before I locked the screen. She'd just try to get ahead of it, shape the story before I heard it. No, better to walk in blind. Instead, I texted Abby, got the email. Friday, a few seconds later. You okay? Want me there? Maybe. It's family. So probably not. LOL. Call me later. Don't spiral. Her texts always landed like handshakes. Firm, familiar. A reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this. I shut the laptop, rubbed my eyes, and looked around the empty classroom. Desks crooked. A half-wiped whiteboard. A coffee ring from a cup I'd forgotten to toss last week. The whole place smelled like chalk and stale ambition. But suddenly, I felt something shift inside me. Not panic, not even grief. Just a strange clarity. He really did it, I thought. He didn't let them take it back. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Abby. It was Tess, my cousin. We hadn't spoken since the reception line at the funeral, where she'd hugged me too tightly and whispered, "You still have that conscience problem, huh?" Her text read simply, "Friday's going to be illuminating." I stared at the screen for a long moment before turning it face down. Yeah, I bet it would. The moment I stepped into that conference room, I remembered why I avoided family weddings, reunions, and anything involving circular seating and last names. The place smelled like lemon oil and tension, sharp, polished, and waiting for someone to make a mess. The Levinson and Hart boardroom hadn't changed since I was a teenager, tagging along with Grandpa Harold. Same mahogany table, same leather chairs that squeaked when you shifted wrong. Same yellowing portraits of firm founders glaring down from the walls like they disapproved of everyone's estate plan. My mother greeted me with that glassy-eyed warmth reserved for cameras and Christmas cards. "Jonas," she said, standing too quickly, palms smoothing invisible creases on her navy blazer. "You made it." I nodded, didn't hug, didn't smile. Just walked past her and took a seat at the far end of the table, 2 chairs down from my cousin Martin, who barely glanced up from his phone. Tess slid into the chair across from me, dropped her oversized purse with a dramatic sigh, and leaned in. "This is going to be something, huh?" she whispered, like we were co-conspirators in a murder mystery dinner party. I gave her the kind of look that said I wasn't hungry for whatever she was serving. Douglas Callahan, my father, stood by the windows, arms crossed, suit perfect. He was talking to Uncle Ray about real estate markets like nothing unusual was about to happen. That was his gift, making denial look dignified. Arnold Levinson entered precisely at 10 o'clock. No flourish, no smile, just a thin file folder and a nod that said, "Let's get on with it." We did. He began with pleasantries. William Harold Callahan lived with purpose and precision. Today, we honor his final wishes. The usual script. My eyes drifted to the folder in Arnold's hands, the one Grandpa had probably signed with deliberate strokes while sipping black coffee at 6 a.m. The first half of the reading was what you'd expect. $10,000 to Mrs. Sullivan, the housekeeper of 20 years. $5,000 to Al, the gardener who used to sneak me extra blueberries from the backyard bush. Some art to a museum, some books to a historical society, a few personal letters to old colleagues. Most of the room checked out mentally by the time we got through Aunt Marlene's silver tea set. I didn't. I listened. Then Arnold cleared his throat. "There remains the matter of the primary estate holdings," he said, glancing at the page, "including all financial accounts, investment portfolios, and the Callahan family property on Fletcher Hill." My father sat up straighter. Tess adjusted her earrings. Arnold looked straight at me. "To my grandson, Jonas Callahan, I leave the sum of $15 million. In addition, I grant him sole ownership and all rights to the Callahan estate, including the property at 71 Fletcher Hill and its contents, without condition." Silence. not respectful silence. Shocked, humming silence, the kind that pulses behind your ears, like a radio station between frequencies. Martin's pen slipped from his hand. Tess's jaw dropped just enough to break character. And my mother, God bless her, managed a whisper that somehow sounded both rehearsed and betrayed. That can't be right. I didn't say anything, didn't move. I felt every pair of eyes shift to me like I was some rogue domino no one saw coming. And when I finally looked up, slowly, I met my father's eyes. His were ice, the kind of fury that doesn't explode, the kind that calculates. Arnold kept reading, but I didn't hear the rest. Something about business assets, tax clauses, a few charitable donations. I just stared at the grain in the table, the tiny crack where two planks met, the spot where Grandpa once tapped a sugar packet during a meeting. He'd done it. He'd bypassed the show, the formality, the expected lines of succession. He'd given it all to me. I could almost hear his voice. This wasn't for who smiled more. It was for who showed up. The room emptied slowly after that. Handshakes from distant relatives who now found me worth talking to. Side glances from those who used to forget my name. A hug from Tess that landed like a trap. And then my father approached. He didn't sit, just placed a hand on the back of the chair beside me and leaned in, calm as a man commenting on the weather. "We need to talk," he said. "Privately." "We gave you everything," my father said, not 5 seconds after the waitress set down my coffee. "And this is how you repay us?" I stirred the cup slowly, watching the cream swirl into something cloudy. It was too sweet. Or maybe just bitter in the wrong places. The diner hadn't changed since I was a teenager. Same cracked vinyl booths, same jukebox that hadn't worked in years but still lit up when you fed it quarters. There was a stickiness in the air, pancake syrup and performative kindness. My mother sat across from me, hands folded perfectly, like this was a brunch invitation and not a battlefield. Her smile was brittle porcelain, chipped at the edges. "You haven't returned any of our calls," she said, as if that was the real crime. I nodded once. "I read the will. I thought that was clear enough." My father's knuckles tensed around his coffee mug. "It was misguided," he said. He wasn't thinking straight. "He signed it months before his health declined," I replied. "Arnold has the paperwork, doctor's sign-off and all." "That's not the point," my mother cut in, voice sugar slick. "The point is, Harold always wanted the family to remain intact. You isolating yourself, making a spectacle, it's not what he would have wanted." I took a slow sip. Too sweet. Definitely the wrong kind of bitter. She continued, eyes wide with curated hurt. "You live alone. You work at a public high school in a town he didn't even like. And now you're suddenly the face of the Callahan name? Jonas, that's not a legacy. That's a withdrawal." There it was. Withdrawal. Like I was siphoning from some emotional trust fund I didn't contribute to. Like showing up to take care of Harold during his last lucid weeks wasn't enough. "Don't confuse absence with sacrifice," I said softly. My father leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You're not thinking clearly. That money was meant for the family. We have responsibilities, accounts to manage, staff to pay, reputations to maintain. And you think I should fund your lifestyle in the name of unity?" "We're not talking about lifestyle," he said sharply. "We're talking about equity." I looked at him. Really looked. The tie slightly off-center, the gray at his temples darker than it used to be. There was a desperation in his eyes that didn't match the calm in his voice. He was losing grip, and I was the thing slipping away. My mother reached across the table, laid her hand on mine. "You know your father's pride won't let him ask, but we're asking. Just help us balance things." There was a moment, brief but real, where guilt tried to worm its way in. The boy in me, the one who used to count their footsteps coming home, wondered if saying no meant becoming heartless. But then I remembered what Grandpa had told me once, years ago, when I asked him why he didn't bail my father out after the third failed venture. Some people, he said, love you more for your silence than your soul. That's what this was. They didn't want me. They wanted what came with me. I gently pulled my hand back. You didn't lose money, I said, voice steady. You lost trust. The waitress returned, placing the check on the table. She didn't ask if we needed anything else. Smart woman. I reached into my wallet, pulled out a 20, and laid it down beside the untouched toast. This covers the coffee, I said, rising. My conscience is free. They didn't stop me. My father stared down at his mug. My mother blinked once, as if rehearsing tears that refused to show up. As I stepped out into the parking lot, the sky hung heavy, gray, undecided. My phone buzzed. Tess, you might want to check with Arnold. They're not done. I didn't respond. Not yet. But I knew she was right. I hadn't stepped inside the house in 5 years. It still smelled like cedar and lectures. It hit me the moment the front door creaked open. Wood polish, dust, and something older. Not old like mildew, but old like memory. That heavy silence that settles in a home after its purpose moves on. The spring rain tapped gently against the front windows, just enough to echo through the entry hall. I let the door close behind me and stood there a moment, letting the dim light and musty stillness wrap around me like a worn coat I hadn't meant to wear again. Harold Callahan's house didn't just hold furniture, it held rules. It held words that were never quite shouted, but always landed like a full sentence. You didn't run down hallways here. You didn't put your elbows on the table. And you didn't question why every single light switch plate was polished to a mirror shine. He used to joke, "This place will outlive me. Just make sure it doesn't outgrow you." Back then, I thought he meant I could never fill the space. Now, I wondered if he meant I shouldn't let it become something I'd fear stepping into. I moved slowly through the rooms. The living room was just as I remembered. 2 armchairs facing the cold fireplace, with a chessboard still mid-game on the side table. My grandfather never finished games unless he lost. And he never lost. Books lined the walls, leather-bound, cloth-covered, some cracked and flaking from age. His reading glasses were still on the end table, folded neatly atop a copy of Leaves of Grass. I walked into the kitchen, where every drawer still opened with that soft hush of friction and memory. The refrigerator hummed like it had something to prove. There were no magnets, no reminders, just a house waiting for its next set of instructions. Upstairs, I avoided the bedroom. It felt too intimate, like walking into someone else's last thought. Instead, I made my way to the study. The room had always been his sanctuary. Warm, paneled walls, a massive desk, the kind you couldn't move without guilt. Books stacked in logical chaos, some alphabetized, others arranged by mood or authorial temper. I sat down behind the desk, the leather still creaking like it remembered him better than I did. On the corner was the Twain book he'd given me. Same cracked spine. I opened it, half out of nostalgia, half out of habit. A key slid out from between pages 212 and 213. Small, brass, deliberate. There were 3 drawers in the desk, 2 unlocked, filled with pens, yellow pads, an old pocket watch I remembered winding as a kid. The 3rd, bottom right, hadn't opened since I was 16 and snooping. I inserted the key. It turned with a click that sounded more like a release than a mechanism. Inside, a thick envelope, a folded document, and a short handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. "Jonas, if you're reading this, then I wasn't wrong. Don't guard this house. Don't preserve it like a tomb. Build something worth inheriting. H. I sat back, letting the weight of his words settle. Underneath the note was a large folded sheet. Architectural paper, thick and matte. Unfolded, it revealed a detailed floor plan. The house transformed, not into apartments or a showroom, but into a community space. Bookshelves lining every wall, a converted study room, a sign drawn in ink at the top. Callahan Community Literary Center, free to all. Built on trust. Built to last. My hands trembled, just a little. Not from shock, from recognition. He hadn't left me a legacy to maintain. He'd left me one to finish. My phone buzzed on the desk, startling me. Arnold, I answered with a dry throat. Jonas, he said, voice low and flat. Your father just filed an injunction. They're going after the trust. Of course they were. The rain hit harder now, like the sky had finally made up its mind. I never cared much for money until someone tried to freeze it. I was back in Arnold Levinson's office, same ticking clock on the bookshelf, same stubborn leather chairs that didn't believe in comfort. Outside, the clouds hung low over downtown, like they were waiting for the verdict, too. Arnold sat across from me, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal a watch that hadn't changed since I was 12. The man never rushed a sentence or a settlement. That's why my grandfather trusted him, and why I was here now, trying to steady myself as he read the latest motion. Your father, Arnold said, with the same tone he might use to report a slow plumbing leak, has filed for a temporary injunction against the disbursement of the Callahan Trust. I nodded, slowly. I'd known it was coming. Just didn't expect the paperwork to feel heavier than grief. On what grounds? I asked, claiming mental incapacity, that Harold was influenced in his final months, that the will is flawed, and that you're, quote, not a suitable sole beneficiary due to estrangement. I smirked at that. Estrangement, I repeated. They finally found a way to make distance my fault. Arnold didn't smile. They're using every lever they've got. The trustee representative, a woman named Ellen, whose blazer was the exact color of a lukewarm latte, sat silently beside Arnold, scribbling notes but never looking up. She cleared her throat gently. Given the family dynamics, it may be worth considering mediation. A partial settlement, even just a gesture. It could deflate the litigation before it escalates. Arnold gave me a glance that said, I didn't ask her to say that, but I also didn't stop her. I leaned back, letting the chair fight my shoulders. A gesture, I echoed. Like what? 10%? A courtesy million? Ellen folded her hands. It's not about the amount. It's about intent. Optics. My grandfather used to say, when the money moves, the masks drop. He was right. And they were dropping fast. I pulled the envelope from my coat, one of Harold's journals I'd borrowed from the study. Page marked, folded neatly. I slid it across the table to Arnold. What's this? He asked. His handwriting, from 2 years ago. Arnold opened it, read silently. Jonas is not the loudest Callahan, but he's the one who stayed upright. He never asked for money, never expected it. That's exactly why he should have it. Arnold nodded. This would hold up. I don't want to win, I said. I just don't want to let them lie about who he was, or what he believed. There was a silence then. Not heavy. Not sad. Just solid. Like the kind of quiet Harold would sit in, waiting for the next move. Arnold reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a single-page form. Here, he said. Refusal to enter mediation. Decline to settle. Assert trust validity as filed. He slid me a pen. I didn't hesitate. I signed. We walked out into the gray light of late afternoon. Courthouse across the street. Post office to the left. The world still spinning like it hadn't just shifted under my feet. Arnold was halfway through reminding me to check in with the bank trustee Monday when I saw movement to the right. A man stepping out the side entrance of Levinson's building, suit sharp, steps measured. My father. He didn't look surprised to see me, just raised his chin half an inch, like a man who still thought posture meant power, and turned down the street without a word. I watched him go. You learn more about a man when he's losing than when he's winning, I said, mostly to myself, especially if that man is your father. My mother wore her Sunday pearls and a widow's voice. Trouble was, no one had died this time. The diner was quieter than usual. Mid-morning lull between breakfast and the lunch crowd. A few locals nursed coffees, flipping through folded newspapers, or swiping silently on their phones. Outside, the sidewalks were damp with drizzle, the kind of weather that made Vermont feel like a sigh. She sat in a booth by the window, posture perfect, eyes soft but purposeful. The pearls caught the light, like they had something to say too. "Jonas," she said when I slid into the booth. No hug, just the name, like a sigh she'd practiced. "Mom," I replied, nodding once. She didn't waste time. I thought maybe we could talk, just you and me, without all the noise. I wanted to laugh at that. My mother had spent her life mastering the art of polite noise, little phrases laced with expectations, delivered so gently you didn't realize they'd wrapped around your neck until they pulled. "I'm listening," I said. The waitress came, poured us both coffee. I didn't order anything else. I didn't plan to stay long. My mother stirred her cup without drinking. "Your grandfather. Near the end, he wasn't himself." I didn't answer. Just let the words hang there, like fog on the glass. She tried again. "He was confused. He thought you were someone else once. Called you Robert." "Robert was his dog in college," I said quietly. "He also called you Doris once, remember?" She blinked. "That's not the same." "Number, it's not." I leaned forward slightly. "Because he wanted to remember me. He just couldn't always get there." Her smile didn't break, but her tone shifted. Softer. Sharper. "We all miss him," she said. "But grief can make people selfish, defensive. I know it's been tense. But I truly believe he meant for all of us to share in what he built." I nodded slowly. "Is that what he told you, when you brought the lawyer to his bedside?" She flinched, just a flicker. "I was trying to help him get his affairs in order." "You were trying to make sure your name stayed on the deed." She didn't respond, just folded her hands over the mug like it was something sacred. I felt my phone buzz in my coat pocket. Ignored it for now. "I'm not here to fight," she said, lowering her voice. "I'm here because I think you're making a mistake that will follow you." There it was. Not a threat, never that blunt, but the suggestion of consequence, the echo of disapproval she'd used my entire life. "Mom," I said, quieter than before, "you once told me that legacy is about what people remember, not what they inherit. But you only seem to remember the parts of Harold that made him difficult to argue with." She looked up, and for a second, I saw it. Something real. Regret, maybe. Or just the recognition that her son wasn't going to fold this time. My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, glanced at the screen. Arnold. Mental eval dated 6 weeks before death, fully lucid, signed and witnessed, rock solid. I slid the phone across the table toward her. She didn't pick it up, just stared at the screen like it had spoken out of turn. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I said. "I'm doing this because I knew him. The him you stopped visiting when he asked hard questions." Her eyes shone, but not from tears. "Not really." "You think this makes you honorable?" she said. "Keeping it all?" I shook my head. "Your tears don't buy justice. Not anymore." We sat in silence for a while, the kind where silverware clinks from other tables become thunder. The waitress brought the check, set it gently in the middle like she was breaking up a fight. My mother didn't move to pay it. When I stood, she looked up at me. Not angry, not pleading, just resigned. "Well," she said, fixing her pearls, "then we'll do it the hard way." She smoothed her napkin, folded it carefully. "You always preferred that." Outside, I spotted Tess across the street, pretending not to be watching from her parked car. She gave me a little wave. I didn't wave back. The attic had always been off limits. Turns out it held more than dust. It was the only room in the house Harold had ever locked. As a kid, I used to think there was treasure up there, or maybe a ghost. Once, when I was 9, I'd snuck halfway up the stairs before a single creak in the floorboards sent me bolting back down like I'd triggered a trapdoor. But now the house was mine, and the lock, like so many other things, had no one left to defend it. The key was hanging behind his old coats in the front closet, brass, small, and tied with a thin red ribbon, as if someone once meant to label it, but never did. The stairs groaned as I climbed, dust puffing from each step like the house was sighing in protest. At the top, a wooden door with a handle cold to the touch. I turned it. The attic smelled like old paper and forgotten warmth. Light filtered in through a round window, enough to outline shapes beneath old canvas sheets. A steamer trunk, stacks of boxes, rolled blueprints bound with string, and journals. Stacked in perfect columns, each tied with twine, labeled in Harold's crisp handwriting, 1986 to 1989, 1990 to 1993. Personal. Do not destroy. I pulled the last one toward me and sat down cross-legged on the floor, like I was 12 again, reading by flashlight past bedtime. Inside the journal, Harold's handwriting was sharp and clean. He wrote like he talked. No wasted strokes, no decoration. One entry from 5 years ago read, "Douglas requested another advance." Framed it as a temporary restructure of the investment portfolio. No mention of repayment. Jonas would have asked twice, then refused. That's the difference. Another. Older. Jonas earns. Douglas expects. I swallowed hard. I didn't know what I'd come looking for. But this felt heavier than confirmation. It felt like permission. I flipped further. One page was just a single sentence. The hardest thing about being a father is choosing which silence to break. Near the bottom of the trunk, tucked between 2 financial ledgers, I found a small folder, labeled in ink, "Final Draft, Private." Inside, a typed will. Marked version 3. I scanned it. There it was. My name, not buried under legalese or family tree charts. Just clear. To my grandson, Jonas Callahan, sole beneficiary. Paperclip to the front was a short letter, written by hand. His handwriting was slower here, a little less sharp, but every line still landed. "Jonas, you were never the fallback plan. You are not a correction for your father's mistakes. You're the legacy, because you understood before I ever had to explain it. Because you showed up. Because you never asked what you were owed. And because I want the world to see my name, our name, attached to something built with dignity. This isn't about blood. It's about belief." I sat there for a long while, the kind of stillness you only get when no one else knows where you are. He hadn't just trusted me with money. He'd trusted me with the end of his story. My phone buzzed on the attic floor beside me. It was Abby. I'm outside, coffee in hand. Also, "You're going to want to see this." I climbed down the attic steps one at a time, journal tucked under my arm like it might vanish if I blinked too long. At the door, Abby stood with her hair damp from the drizzle, 2 coffees in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. She handed me the cup, didn't say anything right away. Then, "This just came by courier. From your father's lawyer." Of course it did. She asked if I'd forgiven them. I asked if it mattered. We were sitting on the back porch of the Callahan house, 2 cups of coffee going cold between us, rain brushing the gutters in a steady rhythm. The rocking chairs creaked, like they had their own opinion about the family legacy I'd just inherited. The air smelled like damp wood and whatever the trees release when spring gets impatient. Abby pulled her knees up to the seat, balancing her cup on one thigh. "You always do this," she said, not unkindly. "You get quiet when you're most certain." "I'm just tired," I replied. She tilted her head. "Of what? Fighting?" "No," I said. "Of pretending I don't know what comes next." The attic journals were still on the desk inside. I hadn't told her everything I'd read, not yet. Some things needed space before they became conversation. But I had shown her the blueprint. She'd unrolled it on the porch floor with the care of someone handling something holy. He'd drawn everything: reading rooms, shelves wrapping the old study, a garden path around the back. He even labeled the chairs in the main hall. At the top of the plan, written in his precise hand, Callahan Literary and Ethics Center. Free. For all. Built with intention. It wasn't a monument. It was an invitation. "Did you know?" I said, gesturing to the notes. "He named a room after his mother. Great-Grandma Estelle. She left the family for a year's once, started a bookstore out west, came back when her father passed, and never spoke of it again." Abby smiled. "Sounds like someone I know." I shrugged. "She also got arrested for throwing a book at a judge." "Still sounds like someone I know." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain do what rain does best: make everything feel slower, softer, just a little sad. "I don't want to just keep the house," I finally said. "I want to open it. I want people to come here and think, this is what legacy looks like when no one's trying to hoard it." Abby nodded slowly. "So do it." "It won't be simple," I added. "Permits, zoning, money, press." "You have all of that," she said. "You just don't have excuses anymore." I looked out into the yard. The porch light flickered once, like it agreed. Harold had written, "Jonas isn't the backup plan. He's the legacy." But legacy wasn't a possession. It was work. It was the job no one put on your resume but expected you to do anyway. "I'm not going to guard this place," I said aloud. Maybe to her, maybe to myself. "I'm going to grow it." She didn't say anything at first, just smiled in that quiet Abby way, like she already knew the answer and was letting me arrive at it for myself. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook. "Great," she said, "because I have about 12 ideas, starting with the front lawn and ending with a poetry slam in the pantry." Later that night, I sat at the desk alone. The rain had stopped, but the house still held the echo of it in the rafters. I pulled out one of Harold's blank ledger books and started sketching. Not walls or permits or programs. People. Faces. Kids from town who needed a place to read without feeling watched. Retired teachers who still had stories left. A community that didn't need another museum, but maybe needed a reason to walk through a door that didn't expect anything in return. That's what he was building. That's what I wanted to finish. My phone buzzed. It was a push notification from the local paper. Callahan family lawsuit. Heats up. Father sues son over $15 million. Of course he did. "They're bluffing," Arnold said, setting down the folder like it weighed more than the table. "And they're hoping you won't call it." Outside, the May light was soft and slow, the kind that made the dust on the windows glow. Inside Levinson's office, the air was dry and filled with the quiet scuffle of paper being pushed, unfolded, laid bare. Abby sat in the chair next to mine, silently sipping lukewarm tea from a paper cup. She didn't speak, but I could feel her attention moving between the documents and the lines on my face. I appreciated that. Her presence, not her commentary. Arnold adjusted his reading glasses, flipping to a second tabbed section. "These are the loan statements," he said. 3 separate transfers from Harold's personal account to a holding company under Douglas's name. All logged. No repayment. No interest. I didn't flinch. I'd expected that much. "This," he said, pulling out a single-page printout, "is a property tax deferment your father filed using Harold's name without his signature. Quiet. Minor. But illegal." I rubbed my jaw. "How long's this been going on?" "Long enough that Harold stopped asking for explanations," Arnold said. "Started documenting instead." He reached for another folder, thinner this time, and handed it to me. "His private ledger," he said, "not the one the family accountant knew about." I opened it carefully. The pages were filled with Harold's neat handwriting. Not just numbers, but observations. Little footnotes in the margins. Douglas asked again. "Used Abby's illness as leverage. I suspect the story was exaggerated. He assumes I won't notice. I notice everything." Jonas declined the advancement, offered to tutor instead. He still brings me coffee. No cream. It wasn't just accounting. It was a journal. A map of someone watching disappointment happen in real time. I closed the book slowly, setting it back on the table with a quiet thud. "You okay?" Abby asked, finally breaking the silence. I nodded, even though I wasn't. Not because of what was in the pages, but because it confirmed what I'd suspected for years and still hoped wasn't true. Harold had known. All of it. He'd just chosen not to confront it. He'd document it instead, maybe because he knew the day would come when it mattered more to prove than to punish. Arnold leaned back in his chair. "You could offer a partial settlement," he said, voice neutral. "Something to de-escalate." I shook my head. "Number we're not settling. Let the court see everything." It surprised me how steady my voice was when I said it. Arnold didn't push, just nodded once and began organizing the papers into clean stacks, like loading ammunition for a war I hadn't started, but had decided to finish. A minute later, he slid a single sheet across the table. Not legal paperwork this time, but a printed email. "Press inquiry," he said. "Local paper. They want your side before the hearing." I looked at the letterhead. Familiar name, familiar tone. "They've spoken to my father?" I asked. "Yes," Arnold said. "He gave them enough to print an angle. If you don't respond, you know how that reads." Abby leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to go on the record. But you can't let silence be the whole story, either." I nodded, staring down at the paper like it had teeth. Harold once told me, "A man's true record is what he does when no one's keeping score." Now someone was, but I wasn't afraid of the record anymore. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't let people see it. "Why didn't you just split the money?" she asked. "Wouldn't that be easier?" The question landed softly. No malice, just curiosity wrapped in Vermont politeness. I was sitting in a squeaky vinyl chair, headphones slightly too snug, surrounded by egg carton foam on the studio walls and the faint smell of burnt coffee. The local public radio studio was a box of a room. Nothing glamorous, just wires, dials, and a calendar stuck permanently on last September. The host, Linda Grant, was known for her sharp questions and her warm laugh. She hadn't laughed yet. "It would have been easier," I said, leaning toward the mic. "But easier isn't always cleaner." She raised an eyebrow. "Cleaner?" I smiled faintly. My grandfather used to say that. He had a thing about avoiding shortcuts. Abby sat behind the glass in the control booth, arms crossed, nodding once as I spoke. She didn't need to signal anything. I could feel her there. Steady, like she always was. Linda flipped her notepad open. So for the folks just tuning in, you inherited $15 million in the family estate. Your father and his legal team have filed for a reversal of the will. You've refused mediation, and now the case is going to court. Is that about right? More or less, I said. And you haven't spoken publicly until now? Correct. She let a beat pass. Why now? Because silence is a story too, I said. And I'd rather write mine in my own words. We talked about Harold for a while, his war stories, his dry wit, the way he read contracts like novels, and novels like contracts. Linda asked if he'd been difficult. He was complicated, I said, but not dishonest. Never dishonest. And you? She asked. Are you doing this for justice, or to get even? That one stung a little, not because it was unfair, but because it was fair enough to deserve a real answer. I'm doing this, I said, because some truths deserve to be seen in daylight, and because I'm tired of pretending that legacy has to mean silence. Linda leaned forward. Don't you think you're holding on too tight? I looked at the microphone, then beyond it, toward the hallway where I used to walk with Harold after dinner, his hand on my shoulder, always steering just slightly. No, I said. I'm holding on just tight enough so the truth doesn't slip away. After the interview, we shook hands. She didn't smile, not right away. But as I turned to leave, she said quietly, that was the first time I didn't feel like a Callahan was selling something. Outside, the spring wind had teeth. Abby handed me my coat. You sounded like yourself in there, she said. Didn't know I had a sound? You do now. We walked to the car in silence. Sometimes, the best way to explain who you are is to stop explaining and just tell the truth. The next morning, I found a folded note on my doorstep. No name, no return address, just 5 words, written in blue ink. He'd be proud. Keep going. That was enough. He was standing in my hallway, holding a court order, like it was a family photo. The last of the evening light spilled in behind him, framing his figure in the front doorway, like something out of a stage play. He didn't look uncertain. Just placed, like this was his entrance cue, and he'd been rehearsing the scene. Wind moved through the trees outside. The Callahan house creaked low in its bones. I stood near the bottom of the stairs, mug of tea still warm in my hand. I knocked, he said. No answer. I didn't respond, just watched as he stepped forward onto the hardwood. He held up the envelope, legal weight, thick and folded sharp. Judge signed it this morning. Temporary motion for shared occupancy during probate. It's valid. Doesn't make it right, I said, setting my mug down on the banister. He looked around the foyer like it was an old suit he used to wear. Nostalgic, slightly bitter. His eyes landed on the photograph of Harold and me on the shelf by the stairs, one of the few pictures I hadn't packed away. I helped him buy this house, he said. And I helped him stay in it, I replied. He turned to face me fully. You're really going to do this? Pretend like this is yours now? Like you're some kind of moral heir? I took a breath, slow and deliberate. I'm not pretending. He moved past me into the hallway, his shoes making that soft, defiant sound against the old wood floors. He paused outside Harold's study, glanced at the door, then at the keys hanging from the hook nearby. You changed the locks. I changed the patterns, I said. Locks were a side effect. He didn't like that. I could see it in the way his jaw shifted, just slightly off-center. Jonas, he said, voice lowered now, like he was offering wisdom instead of judgment. This fight isn't about money. It's about principle. No, I said. It was about principle. Yours just don't match mine. He walked into the living room without waiting. Sat in Harold's old armchair like it was still his birthright. I built things too, you know, he said. Not just your grandfather. I built connections, reputation. I kept this family from turning into another sad story, about rich people with no direction. I didn't answer. I'm not the villain here, he added. I'm the one who carried the damn name while he sat in this house, judging everyone from a distance. You didn't carry the name, I said quietly. You cashed it. He stood up slowly. You think Harold was a saint? You think he gave you this because you earned it? He pitied you. I walked into the room, calm, deliberate. The light from the hallway stretched long across the carpet, the kind of light that made every dust particle feel like a decision. You didn't lose the money, I said. You lost the man who trusted you to deserve it. For a moment, he didn't speak, just stared at me like he was trying to remember who I used to be and why that version didn't show up anymore. Then, in one swift motion, he folded the court order and slipped it back into his coat. This isn't over, he said. I know, I replied. He walked out the front door without another word. No slam, no insult. Just the weight of a man leaving a place that no longer recognized him. The door clicked shut, and I stood there, still, the silence folding around me like a long exhale. A knock came a minute later. Not from him. Abby. She held up an envelope with a county seal. From Arnold, she said. It's official. Final hearing set. For next week. I looked down at the letter, then back at the door my father had just walked through. Good, I said quietly. Let's finish this. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Abby said. Sometimes it means finally remembering on your own terms. She said it without looking at me, her voice low as she traced the edge of Harold's old floor plan with the tip of her pen. Outside, the rain moved across the windows like fingers, slow, persistent, uninvited, but not unkind. Thunder rolled somewhere off in the distance, not close enough to startle, just close enough to make you listen. The fireplace in the reading room crackled, soft and steady. This was the room Harold called the room no one enters angry. He built it off the back of the house when I was a teenager. Said he was tired of having debates in kitchens and arguments in doorways. Said every home needed a place where people came to speak without weapons. He built it with purpose. Low shelves, wide chairs, thick rugs, no sharp corners, no clocks. Now it was ours, Abby and me, spread out on the rug. Stacks of papers fanned between us like a map for something bigger than either of us. Abby picked up a sketch from the pile. You know he had a ramp planned for the back deck, she said. He thought of everyone before anyone asked. I smiled. That was Harold. Always 3 steps ahead, but never smug about it. She passed me another page, handwritten this time. A draft mission statement, still in his handwriting. To create a space that honors literacy, civility, and the quiet act of becoming better. Not bad for a man who hated small talk, she added. I sat back, my back against the wall. The firelight flickered across the paper, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice reading it aloud. Not preaching, just offering. They tried to erase him, I said. I'll make sure the town remembers. Abby didn't answer. She didn't have to. We started sketching out plans for a community open house. Free, of course. Not some ribbon-cutting gala with tiny shrimp and donor plaques. Just a Saturday afternoon. Books, coffee, maybe music from one of the high school jazz kids. Harold would have hated a podium, but loved the sound of pages turning all at once. I want to call it the Callahan Center for Literary Ethics, I said. Abby looked up. That's a mouthful. Exactly, I replied. Let people work to say it. Make them mean it. She grinned. You're a teacher through and through. Abby stood near the porch, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other, directing volunteers with the confidence of someone who'd organized 3 weddings and a protest in the same weekend. She was wearing Harold's old wool cardigan, said it was the only thing that felt formal enough. I stood beside the signpost, adjusting the angle with the quiet care of someone tucking in a child. The wood was dark walnut, the letters burned in by hand. It read, Harold Callahan, Center for Literary Ethics, free to all, built to last. Harold once told me, the real monuments aren't made of marble, they're made of meaning. That was this. Not a plaque, not a statue, just a door we'd decided would always be open. People started showing up in clusters, some with books to donate, some just curious. Retired teachers, parents with kids. The skeptical neighbors who'd once assumed I was the quiet one with the bookstore girlfriend now shook my hand with polite warmth. There was music, lemonade, a stack of free bookmarks with quotes from Harold's favorite writers, Hemingway, Baldwin, Didion, and one from Harold himself. Read until you remember who you are. Inside, the old study had become the reading room. The kitchen was now the poetry pantry. Harold would have hated the name, but loved the shelves lined with chapbooks and scribbled-in journals from local teens. Near the front, an old record player spun jazz low and steady, and the front parlor buzzed with conversation so soft it sounded like a lullaby made of syllables. When it came time for the ribbon cutting, someone handed me scissors that were unnecessarily large, and a microphone that didn't quite work until Abby tapped it twice. I cleared my throat looking at the small crowd. I'm not much for speeches, I began, but Harold was. Quiet ones, the kind you don't realize you've heard until they've changed how you think. There were a few nods. I kept going. This place, it wasn't about proving I deserved what he left. It was about proving he wasn't wrong to believe in something different. I paused, looked at the porch rail he used to lean on, the step I'd sat on after he first told me I had his eyes. This is his legacy, and it's ours now. Because we chose to remember what mattered, not just to him, but to us. The crowd clapped gently, then stronger. Abby smiled. Someone handed out cookies. And just like that, it wasn't about loss anymore. It was about presence. Later, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, I wandered out toward the far fence near the gravel road. That's when I saw him. My father. He stood still, just beyond the edge of the property line. No car in sight. No motion either. Just standing. Watching. I didn't wave. He didn't move. After a long moment, he turned and walked away. No words, no confrontation, just absence again. But quieter this time. Some goodbyes aren't spoken. Some are only seen. And somehow, we still hear them. I waited until dusk, not for drama, just because Harold liked it quiet. The cemetery sat on a soft slope above Vernon Hollow, tucked between pine trees and an old stone wall that looked like it had been built just to give the wind something to lean on. You could see the whole town from there, the water tower, the school roof, the steeple that never rang quite on time. I brought nothing but a folded page from the ledger and a copy of the mission statement from the center. Both were in my coat pocket, next to the spot where Harold used to carry a flask of black coffee. His headstone was simple, granite, no quotes, no dates on the front, just his full name in deep, honest carving. William Harold Callahan. Below that, smaller. He paid attention. I sat down in the grass across from it. The breeze was just strong enough to move the sleeve of my jacket, like something invisible was checking if I'd grown into it. I didn't speak. I don't think he would have wanted me to. Instead, I pulled out the page. It was from one of his last journals, one I'd never quoted in court or in press interviews. This one was mine. I hope one day he'll sit here, not because he has to, but because he chooses to. He had written that 3 days before the stroke. Just one line on an otherwise blank page. No context, no lesson, just a hope. I hadn't come here out of obligation. I came because the fight was over. The dust had settled. and the silence finally felt like mine. I unfolded the mission statement and smoothed it out on my lap. The Callahan Center for Literary Ethics. A place to read without shame, to write without fear, to remember without permission. I didn't know if it was perfect, but I knew it was true. I held it there in the fading light, letting the shadows stretch across the page until it felt like Harold was reading over my shoulder the way he used to. Quietly, never correcting out loud, just waiting for me to catch my own mistake. He once told me, "You don't pass on your name, you pass on your tone." I leaned forward, pressing my palm lightly against the top of the stone. "I didn't become you," I said, barely louder than the wind. "I became better because of you." The last light disappeared behind the hill. I stood, brushed off my coat, folded the paper carefully, and tucked it into the seam between the grass and the base of the stone. Then I turned to leave. That's when I saw it. A second piece of paper, already there. Tucked under the edge, edges curled slightly from dew. I bent down and picked it up. The handwriting was careful, familiar in a way that felt like looking at your own signature in a mirror. It read, "I wasn't ready, but I'm trying. D." I held the note for a while. Didn't smile, didn't cry. Just let it sit there in my hand like something that didn't need to be held long, just acknowledged. Some people never say sorry, but sometimes they still mean it. Forgiveness doesn't require doors to reopen. Sometimes it's just choosing not to slam them. The house was full, the library buzzing, the porch creaked with laughter, and inside me, everything went still. It had been a year since the ribbon was cut, 1 year since the court ruled, since the fights quieted, the press moved on, and the rest of the town decided I might actually belong here. The Callahan Center didn't just survive, it became something. Today was the anniversary open house, nothing fancy, no press, just what Harold would have wanted. Free books, lemonade, and too many chairs squeezed into rooms that once held only silence. The sun poured through the old windows like it had RSVP'd, and the walls, once stiff with legacy, now held poems and artwork by kids I didn't know 6 months ago. The building breathed differently now. So did I. Abby stood near the back shelf of the fiction room, talking with a retired history teacher about a shared obsession with footnotes. I gave a short reading from A Movable Feast, one of Harold's favorites. The room hushed just enough for the words to feel lived in. "You belong to me, and all Paris belongs to me, and I belong to this notebook and this pencil." When I looked up, a boy, 10, maybe 11, raised his hand. "Did your grandfather really give you all that money?" A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the room. I smiled. He gave me something harder to hold, and harder to waste. The boy nodded slowly, like he understood more than he probably should. That was enough. By late afternoon, the crowd thinned, cookies gone, chairs pushed back. Voices faded into footfalls on the porch. I stayed behind. I walked through the rooms, one by one, like I was checking on something that didn't need checking anymore. The reading room still smelled like coffee and pencil shavings. The poetry pantry had a stack of napkins with half-finished haikus. Someone left a note on the message wall. "This place makes my brain feel safe." I didn't add anything. Some things are better left unsaid. Out back, I settled into Harold's old rocking chair on the porch, the same one he'd sat in for years, facing the yard like he was watching something grow that only he could see. I'd sanded and resealed the arms last fall, but the groan of the wood was still the same. Familiar. Honest. I didn't have anything to read, nothing to plan. No more papers to sign, or press to avoid, or courtrooms to prepare for. Just the sound of birds somewhere near the tree line, the faint clink of a wind chime someone had gifted last spring, the breath of a place that had finally learned to exhale. I closed my eyes. Didn't sleep. Just listened. And in that stillness, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for forgiveness, not for approval, not even for the next chapter. Just here. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is choose to be quiet and content. You know, after everything that happened, I didn't walk away richer. I walked away lighter. It took me years to understand this, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it tonight. Peace doesn't always come when others finally understand you. Sometimes it comes when you finally stop needing them to. We spend so much time trying to carry family expectations, regrets, the things left unsaid. But the truth is, legacy isn't something we inherit. It's something we choose to build, moment by moment, decision by decision, especially when no one's watching. And if there's one thing I've learned from Harold, it's this: what you defend becomes what defines you. So, if you're holding on to something that was never really yours to carry, maybe it's time to let it go. Or maybe it's time to build something better from it. If this story gave you something to think about, let me know by dropping a 1 in the comments. Are you watching from Ohio, Florida, or somewhere else across this big country? Tell me where you're from. I'd love to know. And if you've ever had to draw a hard line with family or find peace your own way, I'd be honored to hear your story below. Finally, if you enjoy quiet stories with meaning and voices that don't shout but still speak truth, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for spending this time with me. Until next time, stay kind and stay rooted.